The bright lights of Lagos filled the evening sky as Davido stepped out of his black Range Rover. The famous Nigerian musician had just finished another successful concert at the Echo Convention Center. Thousands of fans had screamed his name, sang along to every word, and danced until their feet hurt. This was normal life for David Adeleke, known worldwide as Davido. As he walked toward his mansion in Banana Island, Davido felt the familiar tiredness that came after performing. His security team followed closely behind, their eyes scanning the quiet streets. The night air was warm, carrying the sounds of distant music and laughter from nearby homes. Lagos never truly slept, and neither did its biggest music star. Inside, his luxurious home, Davido kicked off his expensive sneakers and threw himself onto his leather couch. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and business partners. Social media notifications never stopped coming. Pictures and videos from tonight's concert were already trending across Africa and beyond. But something felt different tonight. As Davido scrolled through his messages, one caught his attention. It was from his manager, Asa Asika, and it simply said, "Boss, we need to talk. Something big is happening tomorrow. Very big." Davido frowned at his phone screen. Asa never sent mysterious messages like this. Usually his manager was direct about everything: new music deals, concert bookings, brand partnerships. What could be so important that he couldn't explain it over text? The musician tried calling Asa, but the phone went straight to voicemail. This made Davido even more curious. He walked to his kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and tried to think about what could be happening. Maybe it was a new international collaboration? Perhaps a major record label wanted to sign him? Or could it be something about his charitable foundation? As the hours passed, Davido found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept wandering back to Asa's message. He tried watching television, but nothing could hold his attention. The entertainment news was showing clips from his concert, praising his performance and talking about his growing influence across Africa. At around 2 in the morning, Davido finally decided to go to bed. He had learned from experience that worrying about unknown situations never helped. Whatever Asa wanted to discuss could wait until morning. As he lay in his king-sized bed looking up at the ceiling, Davido thought about his journey to fame. He remembered his early days as a young man from Atlanta, moving to Nigeria to pursue music. His father, a successful businessman, had not been entirely supportive at first. But Davido's passion for music and his determination to represent Nigeria on the world stage eventually won his family's support. Now, years later, he was one of Africa's biggest music exports. His songs played in clubs from New York to London, from Johannesburg to Cairo. Young musicians across the continent looked up to him as inspiration. He had built schools, donated to charities, and used his platform to speak about issues affecting African youth. The next morning came quickly. Davido woke up to his alarm at 8 o'clock, feeling more rested than expected. He went through his usual morning routine, a quick workout in his home gym, a healthy breakfast prepared by his chef, and checking his social media accounts. By 10 o'clock, Asa arrived at the mansion. Davido could tell immediately that something unusual was happening. His manager looked excited but also nervous, like someone carrying important news that could change everything. "Davido, sit down," Asa said as they met in the living room. "What? I'm about to tell you might sound crazy at first, but I need you to hear me out completely." Davido raised an eyebrow and settled into his favorite chair. "I'm listening. What's got you so worked up?" Asa took a deep breath. "Yesterday evening, I received a call from the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself wants to meet with you. Not just meet. He's planning to fly to Lagos personally." The room went silent. Davido stared at his manager, trying to process what he had just heard. Ibrahim Traoré, the young military leader who had taken control of Burkina Faso, wanted to meet him? This was not the kind of news Davido had expected. "Are you serious?" Davido finally asked. "The Ibrahim Traoré? The one everyone is talking about across West Africa?" Asa nodded solemnly. "The same one. His representatives say he's been following your music and your work with African youth. Apparently, he has something important to discuss with you about the future of Africa. Davido's mind began racing. Ibrahim Traoré had become a controversial but fascinating figure across West Africa. The young captain had led a military coup in Burkina Faso, promising to fight corruption and foreign influence. Many young Africans saw him as a symbol of change, while others worried about political instability. When does he want to meet? Davido asked, still trying to believe this was really happening. This afternoon, Asa replied. His plane is already on its way to Lagos. Davido spent the rest of the morning in a state of controlled chaos. News of Ibrahim Traoré's unexpected visit to Lagos had somehow leaked to the media, and journalists were already gathering outside his mansion. The usually quiet street in Banana Island was now filled with news vans, photographers, and curious onlookers. His security team worked overtime to keep everyone at a safe distance, while Davido tried to prepare for what might be the most important meeting of his career. He changed outfits 3 times, unsure of what would be appropriate for meeting a military leader who was reshaping West African politics. "Should I wear a suit?" Davido asked Asa as they stood in his walk-in closet. "Or maybe something more casual? I don't want to seem too formal, but I also don't want to appear disrespectful." Asa shrugged, clearly as nervous as his boss. "I honestly don't know the protocol for meeting someone like Traoré. He's not exactly a traditional head of state." Eventually, Davido settled on a simple but elegant outfit: dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a blazer. It was professional but still reflected his personal style. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he wondered what Ibrahim Traoré could possibly want to discuss with him. The afternoon sun was beating down on Lagos when the convoy of black SUVs arrived at Davido's mansion. The crowd outside grew larger and more excited as security personnel in military uniforms stepped out of the vehicles. Then, from the middle car, emerged a figure that had dominated African news headlines for months. Ibrahim Traoré looked younger in person than he appeared on television. At 34, he was only a few years older than Davido, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had changed the course of history. He wore a simple military uniform, without excessive decorations, and his eyes scanned the surroundings with the alertness of a trained soldier. Davido met him at the front door of his mansion, extending his hand for a handshake, but Traoré surprised him by pulling him into a brief, warm hug instead. "Brother," Traoré said in accented English, his voice carrying a mix of French and local African languages. "Thank you for receiving me in your home. I know this is unusual." "Welcome to Nigeria," Davido replied, still trying to process that this was actually happening. "Please come inside. We can talk privately." They walked through Davido's living room, past the gold records on the walls and the awards displayed on shelves. Traoré looked around with interest but made no comment about the luxury surrounding them. His focus seemed to be entirely on the conversation they were about to have. Once they were seated in Davido's private study, away from the ears of security teams and assistants, Traoré got straight to the point. "Davido, I came here because I believe you understand something that many people in power do not," he began. "You understand the hopes and dreams of young Africans. Your music reaches millions of people across this continent, and they listen to you in ways they do not listen to politicians or traditional leaders." Davido leaned forward, intrigued. "I try to use my platform responsibly. Music has always been my way of connecting with people and sharing positive messages." Traoré nodded. "This is exactly why I wanted to meet you. In Burkina Faso, we are trying to build something new, not just a new government, but a new way of thinking about Africa's place in the world. We want to break free from the systems that have kept our continent dependent on foreign powers." The conversation continued for over an hour. Traoré spoke passionately about his vision for African independence, economic self-sufficiency, and youth empowerment. He talked about his efforts to renegotiate mining contracts, reduce foreign military presence, and invest in local agriculture and technology. Davido found himself drawn into the discussion, asking questions and sharing his own observations about the challenges facing young Africans. He talked about his travels across the continent, the conversations he had with fans, and the struggles he saw in communities from Senegal to South Africa. "The young people I meet are tired of waiting for change," Davido said. "They want opportunities, they want to be proud of being African, but they also want practical solutions to real problems: jobs, education, healthcare." Traoré smiled for the first time since arriving. "You understand exactly what I'm talking about. This is why I came to see you. I have a proposal that could help us reach these young people in a way that traditional politics never could." He paused, studying Davido's face carefully before continuing. "I want you to help me organize the largest youth summit in African history, not just a concert or entertainment event, but a real gathering where young Africans can come together to discuss their future and plan concrete actions." Davido's eyes widened. This was not what he had expected. He had imagined maybe a request for a performance at some government event, or perhaps an endorsement. But Traoré was proposing something much bigger and more complex. "You're talking about bringing together young people from across the entire continent?" Davido asked. "From every country," Traoré confirmed. "Students, entrepreneurs, artists, farmers, technology innovators, social activists. We would provide a platform for them to share ideas, create networks, and develop solutions to the challenges we face together." The scope of what Traoré was suggesting began to sink in. This would not just be an event, it would be a movement. And he was asking Davido to be at the center of it. "Where would we hold something like this?" Davido asked, his mind already beginning to work through the logistics. "That," Traoré said with a slight smile, "is something we would decide together. But I was thinking somewhere that represents the new Africa we are trying to build." The weeks following Ibrahim Traoré's visit passed like a whirlwind for Davido. What had started as a surprise meeting in his Lagos mansion had quickly transformed into the most ambitious project of his career. The African Youth Summit, as they had decided to call it, was becoming a reality faster than anyone had anticipated. Davido found himself traveling more than ever before, but these trips were different from his usual concert tours. Instead of performing on stage, he was meeting with university students in Accra, young entrepreneurs in Nairobi, and agricultural innovators in Kigali. Each conversation added new dimensions to their plans for the summit. In Ghana, he sat with students from the University of Ghana who spoke passionately about climate change and sustainable development. They had developed innovative solutions for waste management and renewable energy that impressed even seasoned environmental experts. Davido realized that young Africans were not just waiting for opportunities, they were creating them. His next stop was Kenya, where he met with a group of tech entrepreneurs who had built successful companies serving African markets. One young woman, barely 25 years old, had created a mobile app that connected rural farmers directly with urban consumers, cutting out expensive middlemen and ensuring fair prices for everyone involved. "This is the kind of innovation that needs to be shared across the continent," Davido told his team as they flew from Nairobi to their next destination. "These young people are solving real problems with creativity and determination." Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré was conducting his own outreach from Burkina Faso. Through video calls and secure messaging, he kept Davido updated on his progress in building support for the summit among African leaders. Some were enthusiastic, others were cautious, but most were curious about this unusual partnership between a military leader and a music star. The challenge was finding the right location for the summit. It needed to be somewhere accessible to young people from across the continent, but also symbolically meaningful. After much discussion, they settled on a surprising choice: Arusha, Tanzania. Arusha was perfect for several reasons. Tanzania's founding president, Julius Nyerere, had been a champion of African unity and Pan-Africanism. The city was centrally located and had good transportation connections. Most importantly, it represented the kind of peaceful, stable African leadership that both Davido and Traoré wanted to promote. As plans for the summit grew more detailed, Davido began to understand the full scope of what they were attempting. This was not just about bringing young people together for speeches and networking. Traoré had envisioned something more practical and lasting. The summit would be structured around 5 key themes: economic independence, educational innovation, cultural preservation, environmental sustainability, and political participation. Each theme would have workshops, presentations, and collaborative sessions where participants could develop concrete proposals for their home countries. "We are not just talking about problems," Traoré explained during one of their planning video calls. "We are creating solutions that young Africans can take back to their communities and implement immediately." Davido was particularly excited about the cultural component of the summit. He had invited musicians, artists, and cultural practitioners from every African country to participate. The idea was to celebrate the continent's incredible diversity while also finding common themes that united all Africans. But organizing an event of this magnitude came with unexpected challenges. Some established politicians and traditional leaders were suspicious of the summit's goals. They worried that it might be used to promote revolutionary ideas or undermine existing governments. Davido found himself defending the project in interviews and public statements. "This is not about politics," he insisted during a television appearance in Lagos. "This is about empowering young Africans to build the future they want to see. We are not against anyone, we are for progress." The media attention was intense and not always positive. Some international news outlets portrayed the summit as a potential source of instability, questioning the wisdom of bringing together thousands of young Africans to discuss political and economic change. But the response from young people across the continent was overwhelmingly positive. Applications to attend the summit poured in from every corner of Africa. Students, entrepreneurs, artists, and activists all wanted to be part of what was being called the most important gathering of young Africans in decades. Davido was moved by many of the application letters he read. A young woman from Madagascar wrote about her efforts to preserve traditional music while incorporating modern elements. A group of students from Chad described their project to bring solar power to rural communities. An entrepreneur from Mozambique explained how he was using technology to improve access to clean water. 3 months before the planned summit date, Davido and Traoré met again, this time in Arusha, to inspect the venue and finalize preparations. The International Conference Center was buzzing with activity as workers prepared spaces for thousands of participants. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is really happening," Davido admitted as they walked through the main auditorium. "6 months ago I was just a musician making songs. Now we are trying to change the future of an entire continent." Traoré smiled, looking more relaxed than Davido had ever seen him. "You were never just a musician, brother. Artists have always been the voices of change. You just did not realize how powerful your voice could be." As they continued their tour of the facilities, both men could feel the weight of expectations building around the summit. Thousands of young Africans were planning to attend. Media from around the world would be watching. The success or failure of this event could influence the direction of youth movements across Africa for years to come. That evening, as they sat in a small restaurant in Arusha, Davido asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. What if we are promising more than we can deliver? What if young people leave this summit feeling disappointed or manipulated? Traoré considered the question seriously before responding. Then we will have failed. But if we do not try, we will have failed anyway. At least this way, we give hope a chance. The morning of the African Youth Summit arrived with clear skies over Arusha. Davido stood on the balcony of his hotel room, watching as young people from across the continent streamed toward the conference center. They carried flags from their home countries, wore traditional clothing mixed with modern styles, and moved with the energy of people who believed they were part of something historic. Over the past week, participants had been arriving in Tanzania from all 54 African countries. The logistics had been challenging. Coordinating visas, transportation, and accommodation for over 5,000 young Africans was unlike anything Davido had ever managed. But somehow, it was working. At the conference center, the atmosphere was electric. In the main lobby, a young drummer from Senegal was playing rhythms that seemed to call people together, while a group of South African singers harmonized with melodies that echoed through the building. Entrepreneurs from Kenya were explaining their latest innovations to fascinated students from Morocco. Artists from Nigeria were collaborating with poets from Ethiopia, on impromptu performances. Davido moved through the crowds, greeting participants and feeling their excitement. These were not just conference attendees. They were young Africans who had traveled thousands of miles because they believed in the possibility of change. Many had saved money for months to afford the journey. Others had been sponsored by their communities or local organizations. In one corner of the lobby, he met Amina, a 23-year-old agricultural engineer from Mali who had developed drought-resistant farming techniques. She was explaining her methods to a group of young farmers from different countries, all taking notes and asking detailed questions. This is exactly what we hoped would happen, Davido thought to himself, as he watched the organic networking and collaboration taking place everywhere around him. Ibrahim Traoré arrived in Arusha just hours before the opening ceremony. His presence caused a stir among participants, but not the kind of formal, distant reaction that typically greeted political leaders. Instead, young people approached him with genuine curiosity and respect, asking about his experiences and sharing their own stories. Davido watched Traoré interact with the summit participants and was struck by how natural and comfortable he seemed. This was not a politician trying to win votes or a military leader asserting authority. This was a young African man talking with other young Africans about their shared hopes and challenges. The opening ceremony began at sunset, with the main auditorium filled to capacity. Davido had decided to open not with a speech but with a performance, a new song he had written specifically for the summit. The lyrics were in English, French, Arabic, and Swahili, representing the linguistic diversity of the continent while delivering a message of unity and empowerment. As his voice filled the auditorium, accompanied by musicians from across Africa, Davido could see the impact on the audience. Young people were singing along, dancing in their seats, and wiping tears from their eyes. The energy in the room was unlike anything he had experienced, even in his biggest concerts. When the music ended, the applause seemed to last forever. But when Traoré took the stage, the atmosphere shifted to one of intense attention and anticipation. "My brothers and sisters," Traoré began, speaking in English but occasionally switching to French and local languages, "we are here not because we are dissatisfied with Africa, but because we love Africa too much to accept its current limitations." His speech was unlike any political address Davido had ever heard. Traoré spoke personally about his own journey, from a young soldier to a leader trying to reshape his country. He admitted mistakes and uncertainties. He asked for advice rather than simply giving directions. "I do not have all the answers," he said honestly. "None of us do. But together, we have more knowledge, more creativity, and more determination than any generation of Africans before us. The question is not whether we can change Africa. The question is how quickly we can do it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Young people leaped to their feet, applauding and cheering with an enthusiasm that surprised even the organizers. But more importantly, Davido could see in their faces that they believed what Traoré was saying. Over the next 3 days, the summit unfolded in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations. The workshops were dynamic and productive, with participants developing concrete plans for projects they could implement in their home countries. The cultural performances were spectacular, showcasing the incredible artistic talent present across Africa. But the most powerful moments happened in the informal gatherings that occurred throughout each day. Young Africans were forming partnerships and friendships that crossed traditional boundaries of language, religion, and nationality. A Christian entrepreneur from Nigeria was collaborating with a Muslim engineer from Somalia on a water purification project. Students from French-speaking countries were working with their English-speaking counterparts on educational initiatives. On the second day, Davido participated in a panel discussion about the role of culture in African development. Sitting alongside traditional musicians, contemporary artists, and cultural scholars, he found himself articulating ideas about African identity that he had never fully expressed before. Our music, our art, our stories. These are not just entertainment, he said, to the packed auditorium. They are the foundation of who we are as Africans. When we create and share our culture with confidence, we are telling the world that Africa has something valuable to offer. The audience responded with enthusiastic agreement, but it was a question from a young woman in the crowd that stayed with Davido long after the panel ended. "Brother Davido," she asked, "you have achieved international success with your music. But now that you are involved in this summit, are you prepared to use that success differently? Are you ready to become more than just an entertainer?" The question challenged Davido to think about his role in ways he had never considered. Was he ready to become a political figure? A social activist? A permanent advocate for African unity and development? That evening, as he walked through the conference center observing the ongoing discussions and collaborations, Davido realized that the summit had already changed him. He was no longer the same person who had been surprised by Ibrahim Traoré's visit to his Lagos mansion 6 months earlier. The young people at this summit were not asking him to abandon his music or become someone else. They were asking him to use his platform and influence to amplify their voices and support their efforts to build the Africa they envisioned. As the third day of the summit approached, both Davido and Traoré knew that the real test would come after everyone returned home. Would the energy and optimism of these few days translate into lasting change across the continent? The final day of the African Youth Summit began with an unexpected development that would shape everything that followed. As Davido prepared for the closing ceremony, his assistant rushed into his hotel room with urgent news. "Boss, you need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. "It's trending everywhere." On the screen was a video that had been recorded the previous evening during one of the summit's cultural performances. A group of young musicians from different African countries had spontaneously created a song together, combining traditional instruments with modern production techniques. The song was called New Africa Rising, and it had been shared across social media platforms throughout the night. But this was not just another viral video. Within 12 hours, the song had been downloaded over 2 million times. Young people across Africa were recording their own versions, adding verses in their local languages and sharing them online. Musicians from countries not represented at the summit were creating response songs. The hashtag New Africa Rising was trending in every major African city. "This is bigger than anything we planned," Davido said, watching video after video of young Africans expressing their hopes and dreams through music. The summit has created something that is spreading on its own. When he arrived at the conference center, the atmosphere was different from the previous days. There was still excitement and energy, but now there was also a sense of urgency. Participants seemed to understand that they were part of something that extended far beyond their gathering in Arusha. Ibrahim Traoré was in the main lobby, surrounded by a group of young entrepreneurs who were presenting him with a detailed proposal for a Pan-African Youth Investment Fund. The plan was sophisticated and practical, outlining how young Africans could pool resources to support innovative projects across the continent. They developed this entire proposal in 3 days, Traoré told Davido when he joined the group. "These are not just ideas. These are actionable plans with budgets, timelines, and implementation strategies." Throughout the morning, similar presentations took place across the conference center. Young farmers had created a network for sharing agricultural techniques and resources. Students had designed an exchange program that would allow African youth to study in different countries on the continent. Artists had established a collective for promoting African culture internationally. Each group had developed their ideas during the summit, but they were also building on connections and collaborations that would continue long after everyone returned home. The summit had become a launching pad for dozens of initiatives that participants were committed to pursuing. As the closing ceremony approached, Davido found himself feeling both proud and overwhelmed. What had started as a meeting with Ibrahim Traoré had evolved into something much larger than either of them had imagined. The young people at this summit were not just talking about change, they were actively creating it. The closing ceremony began with a surprise. Instead of the planned speeches and formal presentations, participants had organized their own program. Representatives from each country took turns sharing one specific commitment they were making to implement ideas from the summit in their home communities. The commitments were diverse and inspiring. A group of students from Ghana promised to establish mentorship programs connecting successful African entrepreneurs with young people starting their own businesses. engineers from Rwanda committed to sharing their expertise in renewable energy with communities across the continent. Artists from Senegal pledged to create cultural exchange programs that would celebrate African diversity while building unity. When it was Davido's turn to speak, he set aside his prepared remarks and spoke from his heart. 3 days ago, I thought, I was here to help organize an event, he began. But you have taught me that this was never about organizing anything. This was about recognizing what was already happening across our continent and giving it a platform to grow. He paused, looking out at the thousands of young faces in the audience. I came here as a musician who wanted to use his platform responsibly. I am leaving here as an African who understands that my responsibility extends far beyond entertainment. You have shown me that every one of us has the power to contribute to the Africa we want to see. The response was immediate and emotional. Young people throughout the auditorium stood and applauded, but many were also wiping away tears. The energy in the room was a mixture of celebration and determination. Ibrahim Traoré's closing remarks were equally powerful, but they focused on the practical steps that needed to follow the summit. The success of these 3 days will not be measured by the enthusiasm we feel right now, he said. It will be measured by the projects you complete, the problems you solve, and the lives you improve in the months and years ahead. He announced the establishment of a permanent African Youth Council with representatives from every country on the continent. The council would meet annually and maintain ongoing communication throughout the year to coordinate initiatives and share resources. More significantly, he revealed that several African governments had committed funding to support projects developed by summit participants. This was not charity or aid. It was investment in the ideas and innovations that young Africans were already creating. As the ceremony concluded, something unexpected happened. Instead of dispersing and preparing to travel home, participants remained in the auditorium, continuing conversations and making final plans. The official summit was over, but the real work was just beginning. Davido and Traoré found themselves standing together at the side of the stage, watching as young Africans from dozens of countries exchanged contact information and made promises to stay connected. I think we succeeded, Traoré said quietly, but not in the way either of us expected. Davido nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They had hoped to inspire young Africans and give them a platform for their ideas. Instead, they had discovered that young Africans were already inspired and full of ideas. The summit had simply provided a space for that energy to become visible and organized. That evening, as participants began their journeys home, Davido received a message that would stay with him forever. It was from Amina, the agricultural engineer from Mali he had met on the first day. Brother Davido, she wrote, thank you for helping us find each other. The summit is ending, but the movement is just beginning. See you at the next harvest. The message was simple, but it captured something essential about what had happened in Arusha. The summit had not created a movement. It had revealed a movement that was already growing across Africa. Young Africans were ready to take responsibility for their continent's future, and they had the skills, creativity, and determination to succeed. 6 months after the African Youth Summit ended, Davido stood in his recording studio in Lagos, but he was not working on a new album. Instead, he was on a video call with young entrepreneurs from 15 different African countries, discussing the progress of various projects that had emerged from their time in Arusha. The transformation in Davido's life had been gradual but profound. While he continued making music and performing concerts, a significant portion of his time was now dedicated to what he had begun calling purposeful collaboration. He had established the Davido Foundation for African Youth Development, which provided funding and mentorship for innovative projects across the continent. The foundation's first major success story was sitting right in front of him on the video call. Amina, the agricultural engineer from Mali, had used her connections from the summit to expand her drought-resistant farming techniques to 12 countries. Her methods were now helping thousands of farmers produce more food while using less water. The network we built in Arusha has become our most valuable resource, Amina explained to the group. When I faced challenges implementing new techniques in Burkina Faso, I was able to get advice from farmers in Kenya who had solved similar problems. Similar success stories were emerging across the continent. The Pan-African Youth Investment Fund that had been proposed during the summit's final day was now operational with over $50 million committed by various African governments and private investors. Young entrepreneurs were using the fund to launch businesses that created jobs and solved local problems. In Ghana, a group of students had established a technology center that was training young people in software development and digital marketing. Their graduates were finding employment with international companies while choosing to remain in Africa, contributing to the continent's growing tech sector. The cultural exchange programs initiated by artists at the summit were flourishing beyond anyone's expectations. Musicians from different African countries were collaborating on projects that celebrated their diversity while creating new forms of African expression. These collaborations were gaining international attention and changing global perceptions of African creativity. Ibrahim Traoré's role in these developments had evolved in ways that surprised many political observers. Rather than using the summit's success to enhance his own political power, he had focused on creating sustainable institutions that could operate independently of any individual leader. The African Youth Council had become a respected voice in continental affairs, regularly consulted by the African Union and other regional organizations. Its annual meetings were now major events that attracted participants from around the world who wanted to understand the direction of African youth movements. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact of the summit was something that could not be measured in funding raised or projects completed. Young Africans across the continent had developed a new sense of possibility and connection that was influencing their approach to every challenge they faced. Davido saw evidence of this change everywhere he traveled. In Senegal, he met young musicians who were incorporating traditional instruments into contemporary productions, creating sounds that were distinctly African while appealing to global audiences. In Rwanda, he visited technology companies founded by young Africans who had chosen to build their businesses on the continent rather than relocating to Silicon Valley or London. The most moving example came during a visit to Morocco, where Davido was invited to speak at a university. After his presentation, a young woman approached him with a story that captured the essence of what the summit had achieved. Before Arusha, I thought I had to choose between being proudly Moroccan